Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Herzlich willkommen, Herr Bundeskanzler.
Very warm welcome to the Federal Chancellor back here in Davos. We welcome you here this morning as the Reform Chancellor. Dr. Vasella will introduce you in a few minutes, but I myself wanted just very briefly to say what a harbinger you've been in introducing the reform process in Europe. And you've shown clearly, and it has been shown clearly through the acceptance of this process and acceptance of the absolute necessity of these steps, and that they should continue to be supported in the wider population, in the public at large. We would also like to express our high esteem for your statesmanlike reaction following the tragedy of the tsunami. I think you were the first who spontaneously pledged 500 million euros, and which was followed by a similar figure by the people. So once again, Federal Chancellor, we are very happy to see you here once again in Davos.
Sehr geehrter Herr Bundeskanzler,
Mr. Federal Chancellor, it is a particular honor to be here together with you in Davos, and to say this on behalf of all the participants. When I looked at the subject for today's meeting, once again, taking responsibility for tough choices, I translated this as making tough choices in difficult times, and I thought of you, as Professor Schwab has already said this, I thought of you about the courage and the tenacity with which you have introduced the reform process in Germany. For many decades, Germany has served as an example for how to manage the economy ever since the 1950s. And perhaps today, again, as so far as exports are concerned, you represent, you are among the world leadership with 10% of the world trade. And in the internal market as well, there has been the enormous burden of the payments that had to be made following the reunification, running to more than 600 billion. This was an enormous burden indeed, a great strain. The structural transformation that is something which is ongoing in Germany, and perhaps represents the biggest challenge of all, is the change in the demographic structure. And that's something which we're actually in the thick of. Of course, I cannot forbear today to mention Auschwitz, because it's all over the newspapers. And yesterday was, as we all know, the 60th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. I personally, Mr. Federal Chancellor, think that it was, of course, an appalling, a dreadful time. I don't believe in collective guilt. I believe in the guilt of individual actors. But there is, of course, a collective responsibility, and Germany has taken that on. In this connection, Mr. Federal Chancellor, we must also certainly say that we've seen 60 years of peace in Europe, and that is something we haven't seen for a very long time. Today, Germany is the largest country in Europe, the most powerful economy, and we look forward with keen anticipation to hear you tell us what role you look forward to playing in Europe and what role in the world. Mr. Federal Chancellor, you have the floor.
Dear Professor Schwab, dear Mr. Vasella, ladies and gentlemen, I have to say, Mr. Vasella, I thought it was good and right that you pointed out that we had the 60th anniversary of the release of the Auschwitz prisoners at the time. And it is certainly true that the generation of those who have been born after the war do not bear guilt as such. But obviously there is a high degree of responsibility for them to live up to. And I think I can speak on behalf of my fellow Germans when I say we conjointly stand up to that responsibility and we should live up to it. And this responsibility certainly means that we do not accept that people of different belief, Jewish belief above all, but that also people of different race, different cultural background, have a life in Germany that is not happy, that they are pushed into a corner, segregated, discriminated against, or even attacked. I think that is my opinion, and that is, I think, also the opinion of the younger generations in my country. And I think the international community of states can rightly expect us to live up to this responsibility. But this is not the topic that is meant to be my focus for today's speech here. But I think it was also kind of you to point out that there was this wave of readiness of people to contribute towards emergency relief for the victims of the tsunami crisis. This catastrophe, ladies and gentlemen, very impressively showed us that the idea of this one world we all share with one another is not just a figment of the imagination of researchers or scientists, political scientists, social scientists, but it has shown that what is happening in other countries, be it as a consequence of natural catastrophes or be it man-made catastrophes, really has direct repercussions for our personal lives and economic activity. I think that the motto for this year's meeting for 2005 of the Forum is expressing this very thing. So the attempt is the attempt actually of giving an answer to that challenge. But I think obviously we'd be well advised to not just stop at this motto, but to go further and say, what does this mean for the prime movers around the world, political but also economic elites who have to deal with this? Now, let's not underestimate cultural elites either. They are in existence as well. They are committed as well, and they're doing a great deal. Now, what does this mean internationally speaking? And what does it mean for national societies? And those are thoughts alongside which I thought I was going to speak this morning. Now, firstly, those who are against these new developments and trends, I am firmly convinced that globalization bears greater opportunities for all. There are more opportunities than risks to globalization, but going in and maximizing opportunities and minimizing risks and threats arising from globalization is the responsibility I see for industrialized nations above all. And this means that we have to help less developed nations to a much greater degree than so far. And I would actually like to come in and mention a few points, possibly a bit more modestly than others have done here before me, but possibly more success-orientated. Firstly, we must not use the present debate to let one topic slip into the background, and that is the topic of granting market access to less developed nations, market access into industrialized countries. This has to be a prime topic on the international agenda. This certainly does refer to agriculture, where time and again we see restrictions from the industrialized nations. We have to do away with those. There are still export subsidies being granted that we have to get rid of. We have to strip them out. And it certainly affects all of the raw materials areas. We have to make sure that punitive customs and excise duties and protective clauses are done away with, because otherwise proper sustainable help is impossible, because sustainable help means help for self-help. Secondly, when we met for the G8 summit in Cologne at the time, we very much instigated the so-called HIPIC initiative, the debt relief initiative for the poorest countries. Now, this initiative must be continued. And this must also mean, and in saying this, I agree with Thabo Mbeki, other leaders of Africa. I very much agree with them that this means that the poor countries must make efforts to make sure that the funds made available to them are invested firstly into infrastructure, secondly into health, and thirdly into education above all. And certainly we do expect a degree of good governance by them, and that they certainly should instigate self-reliant controls for those processes of good governance within their own countries. Now, I think at this point in time, we should also say a word about oil-producing countries. You know that oil prices have skyrocketed recently. Very often, this is just due to speculation in the markets. They are not just threatening development on a global scale, economic development and economic activity on a global scale, but particularly poor countries have been heftily affected because they had to pay so much more for importing oil for their countries. And therefore, I would say there is a great responsibility that lies with those who produce oil to make sure that they show the responsibility for the lack of development that can happen with these prices in those poor countries. And I think there are dramatic effects arising from this that we must not lose out of sight. I think we really need to get our act together to keep those effects down. That certainly is one of the prime topics that we have to discuss during the G7 and G8 summit in Great Britain this year. Now, and fourth, certainly we have committed ourselves to the so-called Millennium Targets of the United Nations. And there we have said that freedom and peace are not the consequence of power politics, but of peaceful development. We very much have to make sure that this potential for development that we intend to grant under the umbrella of the Millennium Targets, that those are affordable. Now, the countries we're talking about are all in dire need, and the countries financing aid in the future and right now are under budgetary constraints as well. Now, the question is, how on earth can we finance the Millennium Target? The British government has come in and they've made a proper proposition here. They have said that we should have an international financing facility that would help us in the short run to ensure us reaching the Millennium Targets, at least with a greater degree of certainty than would otherwise be possible. I think that the proposals of the British government are good proposals, and therefore we should really discuss them here properly and hopefully implement some of them during the G8 summit. But the question isn't just how can such a facility be created, but we also need to think about how it can be refinanced. I am very, very grateful for whatever proposal has come on the table, but I think a kaleidoscope of most various proposals is not going to be entirely helpful here. Because if you have such a host of proposals, there is always the danger that people during the G8 summit will take notice of them, but they will debate them at length and not find it possible to agree on one of them. And that really is not living up to the importance of this subject. And Thabo Mbeki and myself, who have met in a bilateral meeting, have agreed that we really have to make an effort to make sure that this this facility gets going, but that we also come up with a proper refinancing proposition for it so that we can properly adopt it during the G8 summit. I'm not trying to exclude any of President Jacques Chirac of France's proposals, but I think if we were to succeed in making sure that those financial flows and transactions that are completely removed from any kind of corporate financing or proper hands-on financing decision, then possibly there may be an opportunity of gaining money out of that process that could be used to fuel this vehicle. Now, if it becomes obvious beforehand that that's not going to be the right way, then obviously we have to think about different options. Now, Germany is certainly very ready to become involved in this debate. And, you know, thorough as we Germans are, we don't just like to debate proposals, but we like going into implementation, and we also pay for our own decisions, mind you. Now, as to the basis of legitimacy, basically, providing a legitimate basis for all of these efforts, they obviously have to be founded on proper national decision-making. Or let me put it in other words, being able to live up to international responsibility is a result of economic strength and not economic weakness. And this is where there is a connection between perceived international responsibility on the one hand and the concern about one's own national economy, which at the same time needs to be set on a course that is most conducive to it being successful right now and in the future. And this very difficult balance is also the background against which we have introduced the reform processes you were mentioning at the beginning. Let me say a few words on those reforms. Why on earth are we going in and doing this in the first place? Mr. Vasella has already hinted at it. We are doing it because we are confronted with two facts that are unavoidable and inevitable. I think possibly we ducked away for far too long from them beforehand. The first one can be described with the term of globalization. I think there really is a rupture in the proverbial sense between the situation you had beforehand of just strengthening your national economy from within. And the second challenge I see is in the very changed demographic makeup of our German society, a lot of European ones obviously as well. So I'm talking about the demographic challenge here. And those are the two challenges that I think we really need to respond to. We have tried to do so. And I think to begin with, we thought that the most important thing was that those social systems and the social security system and welfare systems that have made sure that Germans could live the prosperous, safe and protected life that they have been able to live, that those proven social systems had to be readjusted so that now, with the ever-changing surroundings in economic terms and generally speaking, they are viable tools also for the future. And here, I think this affects three areas predominantly. Firstly, we have a system of old age pensions that is based upon a parity system where employees and workers and employers contribute in a parity way towards the pension funds. So it is pay-as-you-go-along system, which, as you can imagine, got under tremendous pressure in the course of time. Now, obviously, the task was that we needed an additional leg to stand on here, which was a system of capital coverage. We've gone in and introduced that, and to make sure that those who are not so terribly well off could afford building up a private system as a second pension leg to be standing on. We have made sure that the systems were arranged as such that it was possible for them. The whole thing was aiming for striking a balance between the old existing pay-as-you-go-along collective system and private provisions made by the individual. I think as to that, we have ventured upon a good path, and international press and scientists have proven to us that this kind of a mixed system is better than either a fully state-subsidized system, pay-as-you-go-along, or a fully private system either. I think we also have to make sure that our real entry age into old age pensions has to be pushed upwards. People have to work for longer. I think nominal pension retirement age in Germany is 65 years of age, and we still cannot say whether, in fact, we will have to push this towards the 70 limit a bit more than we think we would like right now. I think trends are actually pointing into that direction. Secondly, in Germany, we have one of the best health systems about. All over the globe, really, because irrespective of personal income, we provide every individual with the corresponding degree of healthcare and medical treatment needed to treat the disease or the problem that they're suffering from. I think this is a system that is doing tremendously well, but it has one weak spot, unfortunately a major one. It is too expensive to afford in the future. And this is a point that we really have to look at very closely in the future. And I think here we have to go in with a similar approach as we've gone in for the pension system. We need a new balance between the solidarity approach that we still find important and private arrangements and private insurance. And that obviously entailed a burden for the population, but it had to be done to keep the car going, as it were. So obviously, we had to do away with sick pay benefits after a certain period of time. The affected individual will have to afford that for themselves. In some other areas, we're not going to reduce care given, but we will have to finance things differently. And we will have to make sure that we use some form of control to keep costs under control. And the motto is, health does cost. And that does mean that people have to bear a certain private share. Our experience has been that when people just were asked to make a very minor contribution, we got into pre-revolutionary mood into our country. But we still think it's the right way to go, so this is where we're going. Thirdly, I think we need a labour market that gets liberalised even further than it is. We have a fantastic labour market in Germany at the moment, a very well-functioning, good, low-wage sector. I can only invite everybody to not just look at what associations and federations publish in their magazines, but just do go to Germany and have an experience on the ground. We have a well-functioning, low-wage sector in Germany. We have a much more flexible labour market than you would think looking at it from the outside. And we have now gone in and provided a lot of incentives to go back to work. Now, as you can imagine, that there have been tremendous disputes going on within and across the whole of our society. We have had some tough fights going on, but we are still absolutely convinced that the system that we need in the labour market needs to target the objective of making people fit for the first labour market, but at the same time making sure that they do accept any form of acceptable job offer that is given to them. So it is this fine interplay between promoting on the one hand, but demanding on the other hand. This rights and responsibilities idea that I am sure in the long run will lead to reduction of unemployment figures for Germany. Now, the whole package of these reforms is called Agenda 2010. Obviously has one other aspect, and that is a positive one. We have also gone in and reformed our social systems to make sure we could gain financial scope for three other main targets that we would like to put money into. The first one is obviously investment into the country. We've got 2.5% of investment here. Scandinavians are way above us. We do need the resources. We need to subtract them away from subsidies that were fueling the things of the past, and we need to translate them into future-orientated investment, and that means investment into research and development. Secondly, we need an education system that, like ours at this time, is first class as to the width and the range of population covered, and covered well, in fact. But we also need to make sure that our system that is so good in promoting access for those in need and those of lower social or financial backgrounds. But I think we still need to promote excellence as well. And this doesn't just need to happen in universities or special colleges, but we also need educational elites as well. That certainly is an important point as well. And thirdly, I think we will only be able to maintain our top position amongst leading industrial nations if we promote women working to a much higher degree than we have done so far. And this, I think, can only be achieved if we make sure that those often highly qualified women get given the opportunity to combine family and job life by providing proper child daycare facilities, which so far we're lacking. Ladies and gentlemen, let me come to an end by saying that this reform program that we have implemented against tremendous resistance from certainly parts of our population, I can only invite once more everybody to come to Germany to take a closer look, to really see the reality in Germany, the real facts. So let's make sure that press statements get closer to reality and not the other way around. Now, if you take a proper close look, you'll see the following. Firstly, for years in Germany, the itemized wage costs have been stagnating, a good development for the country. Secondly, we still have one of the best infrastructural networks around that you can find wherever you go. Thirdly, Germany has a fantastic system of professional vocational training. So therefore, there is a huge pool of very highly trained and skilled workforce that really is special also in a global comparison. Fourth, we've got a university system that really opens up opportunities for a lot of young people, and we're still working on improving it further. And finally, fifth, we've got very creative companies and very creative entrepreneurs. We have got workers and employees who are ready to get to the job. In Germany, there is no such thing as a situation that people would ever not work if there was a job to be done. So this attitude, I think, is also a very positive one. And in a nutshell, I'd say that all of those aforementioned things and the results that we can show when standing up against tough international competition, when it is about experts during the phase of stagnation, we haven't lost market share here, but we have gained tremendously. That shows the inherent strength in the German economy. And we're doing all this despite the fact that we're spending 4% of our GDP for making sure that we strike a proper balance between East and West Germany. Tremendous 600 billion euro transfers from West to East. No other national economy needs to bring this about, and I would maintain that I could not imagine any other economy being able to do so. Why don't you give it a try wherever you are? But I think in the process of this, we have shown that Germany, firstly, is able to move and to change. Secondly, Germany is a business location certainly worth working in and investing in. And thirdly, I think we are a country and we are people who do find it important to have social welfare within our country. But the well-being of our own country and ourselves is also understood as a basis to stand up for welfare and well-being of others in the third world. This is what we've got on offer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Federal Chancellor. You've touched upon various subjects, the domestic economy, external economy, and development assistance. Perhaps I could begin with the last point and ask you what specific ideas you have with reference to the funding of the Millennium Project.
Well, firstly, what we're talking about here is that the targets that we have set for ourselves, the 9.7%, to put it in facts, to achieve that in a phased or staged plan. We must get there. We have to get there, that by 2006 we reach the agreed point 33. And then I think we have to make sure that also in the more mid-term period, we need to get to the Millennium targets as set up. At the same time, we have to make sure that the debt relief initiatives have to be continued because they are calculated into these figures, and I think rightly so. And I think we could succeed to using Gordon Brown's idea of the international financing facility. I think we should go in and create this facility because by the end of the day, this is a facility that will help us to work on targets that are burningly important now and to refinance them later on. And it's not a Tobin tax type of idea, but I think it is a good idea to look at those financial flows that really, in real economic terms, there's nothing but hot air and speculation. And I think this is a process which by now is rampant, I have to say, that we should really make sure that we should, have a taxation on such purely speculative financial transactions. Now, whether we can then organize the spending of this revenue properly and whether we could get to the support of at least the G8 players and hopefully a few more is a question that will have to be decided upon in the course of the next few months. If that cannot be achieved, we obviously have to think about other forms of finance. Now, I'm not going to go in and go through this whole vast range of multifaceted proposals that have been tabled even here in Davos, a whole host of them, but I think there are quite a few in them that I'd like to steer free of very clearly. But I think we really have to think about the refinancing of the vehicle. But I hope that financial flows, capital gains from financial flows that are purely speculative could be a good approach.
Do you see a possibility of reducing subsidies in the agricultural area? Is that one possibility?
Well, very much so. But putting an end to agricultural export subsidies, and those would be the first ones we ought to be talking about, our subsidies and other scrapping of subsidies that hamper access to the market for third world countries. And I would very much hope that all countries who are seeking better access to European markets. And I very much hope that all countries who are stepping up to say great things here at the forum and internationally speaking should also be as open about agricultural subsidies. I don't need to name drop here. You know whom I'm talking about.
Mr. Federal Chancellor, you've talked about sustainability of social insurance, sickness insurance, industrial growth and innovation in Germany. You've mentioned all these things very expressly. I don't want to talk about the pharmaceutical industry in particular, but
US-American colleague has already announced that he's going to tell me something about his special drug. I don't know whether I'm going to say anything to him and whether I'll meet him, but it's already been covered by the international press, which is something.
So could we therefore ask, how do you see Germany as a place where innovative pharmaceutical industry can be put first in practical terms?
I'm not particularly surprised, Mr. Vasella, that you're putting this question to me. And let me say that what we're doing in the field of the health sector is for the first time something that is not just trying to reduce costs. Now, obviously, I mean, we would like to reduce costs as well. It's crucial that we do, and everybody has to contribute to that, the selling parties as well as the receiving end, the patients as well. I mean, when it is about dentistry, about sick pay, etc., etc., and also people have to make a contribution when they go to the doctor, a lump sum payment when they go to the doctor these days. There was tremendous resistance to all those, and it is only fair that those playing in from the other end and also the pharmaceutical industry does do its bit to it. The service providers are an important player here as well. Now, there is obviously the difficult question as to which drugs the sickness funds should pay. Now, it is obvious that important drugs, recognized drugs, are accepted as such and therefore paid for and refunded. Then there is another category of drugs which are, yes, good, but there are similarly good drugs with the same side effects or lack thereof, and amongst those there are very, very different prices amongst all the different ones. And we are not going to interfere with the definition of your prices. I mean, I'm saying that to all the ladies and gentlemen from Pfizer dotted around here. We're not going to put our fingers into your pricing pie at all, but we want to make sure that our sickness funds are not forced to refund people for buying the most expensive drug for them. I think if somebody wants to have the most expensive one, I mean, he's most welcome to, but then the person has to pay the discrepancy between the price of the medium priced drug and the more expensive one. And I'm time and again saying that to our US American friends who are particularly active on this field. Now, if the drug either has significantly less side effects or is of higher therapeutic use, then it is not going to be fixed somewhere at a price. There we are refunding the market price. And that's the system. And my impression is that our international friends, and occasionally also amongst representatives of the German or Swiss pharmaceutical industry, this wonderful system has not been fully digested and therefore understood, which is why I take pains in explaining it in detail.
Very much. We will try very hard, Mr. Federal Chancellor.
Herr Bundeskanzler.
Mr. Federal Chancellor, perhaps one area that you haven't mentioned at all. What is your position on Iraq? At the beginning of the war, you certainly made it clear what your position was. What is your position today?
It's absolutely.
Well, I am not taking anything away from my original positions. Others are not doing this either, as I can find out daily from the press and media examples that I get to see. And I can understand them just as well. But the questions as to how one thought about the war in Iraq in the first place is history, isn't it? What we are now called upon to do is that irrespective of how one felt about going to war against Iraq at the time, and yet again, I haven't really changed my original opinion, but apart from that, I have a vested interest in stabilization and democratization of Iraq, together with the alliance that has gone in. Now, I was the one who tabled the idea of debt relief for Iraq, which is really far away from being a developing country. Certainly in the long run it won't be. But we have tabled this proposal to make sure Iraq could use its money for proper investment and not for debt service. We are the ones who are actively doing things already. We are training police and military security forces. We're doing this in the Emirates in large numbers. We're doing it and we are paying for it ourselves. So we're not asking anybody else to pay for it. We are the ones who actually are making stability in Afghanistan possible today. We are the largest troop contingent within ISAF in Afghanistan, and we're paying that ourselves. We are on the Balkans with 4,000 pairs of boots on the ground. So reproaching the Germans with not doing their international homework, I think nothing could be further away from the truth. But, I mean, this is not true for Iraq and certainly not true of lots of other areas. And let me say one thing very clearly. We are most decidedly in favor of the fact that Iran completely gives up military use of nuclear power forever, if at all possible. But we are as convinced that this is a target that has to be achieved through diplomatic and political means. This is a hotbed region as it is already. The last thing we need is another military conflict in that region. I'm very explicit and outspoken about this because I want everybody to know where Germany stands.
Well, I'd like to have a concluding question from the audience.
To the Chancellor from the public, is there somebody? We would have time for one last question. I think the answers were so perfect,
Thank you.
Mr. Chancellor, that you satisfied everybody. I thank you very much, and thank you. Bye-bye.